How's it going out there, YouTube? My name is Jesse, and I am the curator for the Golden Age, and this is another...
Lost Heroes of the... Wait, this is not a Lost Hero.
No, this isn't technically a Lost Hero. I mean, seriously, who doesn't know? No, this is the, this is like a Lost Origins, like what I did with...
Aquaman. You did the same thing with Aquaman.
Yes, what we did with Aquaman. And the reason why is because Superman's actually original story is different than any origin story that you would find today. I mean, you look at any origin story, yeah, he comes from the planet Krypton, and because he comes to Earth, the Yellow Sun, nothing, that wasn't anything like to do in his original story. In fact, in his very first story, the planet that he leaves from doesn't even have a name. It's just a mysterious planet. Now, I wanted to show his original origin, and they retconned him just a year later in Superman Comics #1, which they reprint most of Action Comic #1. But in just a year, they did a retcon of Superman, and they would wildly change his powers more and more a bit over the years. Like Superman, when he first came out, he could leap tall buildings in a single bound. Now, the animators for the Superman cartoon found that they were wasting time with the jumping animation, and they wanted Superman to be able to gain the ability to fly. So they changed it in the comic books, which...
Superman Comics #10.
Yes, it's Superman #10 is where he flies for the first time. I haven't been able to find this comic, so I don't know the in-comic book story of him being able to fly for the first time. But, be that as it may, that's just an example of how he's changed over the years. Let's see, him working for the Daily Planet doesn't come at first. He works for the Daily Star. No mention of the Yellow Sun giving them their powers and abilities. So that's just how Superman has morphed and changed over the years to get us to the version that we have now. Now, I know more and more with the Superman, we explore Krypton more and more. And all through the Golden Age, they did a lot of exploring of Krypton, which it was wide open. No lore had been done about it, so pretty much anything that you did, you wanted to do. Okay, we're getting away from this. I went over Superman's original origin story, and I point out how his origin story was different in 1938, and even they started changing it in 1939. So you can see what his original origin story was now, and compare it to what it is now, and see what they left the same, see what they've changed, and see what they might have been trying to do when they first came out with Superman. I don't think that they were expecting to come up with a character that was going to stand the test of time like he has, as much as he's been changed over the years. But, hey, he's iconic. I mean, this isn't the only Superman shirt I own. It's just the brightest. I mean, he's very iconic. Well, I mean, anybody who's ever got into comic book knows the name Superman. It's synonymous with comic books. So, let's go ahead and see his first origin story. We'll briefly talk about what they changed, and you can see what they were doing back then. So, let's get into it. Okay, as we're going to get into it here, the very first appearance in Action Comics #1 does lay groundwork for Superman. A lot of the things that is established with him goes on from here. He comes from another planet, but it's not named Krypton. Lois Lane, the fact that he's a reporter, all of that is established. He is Clark Kent in the first issue. He doesn't get his name changed later on. Now, the the adopted parents of Superman will not appear until Superman #1 in 1939, where they completely reshape his origin. From there, he will actually be from the planet Krypton, and then the Kents will find him, and they do deliver him to the orphanage at first, but then Martha, being the kind-hearted individual that she is, decided that she wants to adopt Superman, and they figure out about his strength. His father does tell him, don't be revealing your strength to anybody. No. Don't be revealing your strength to anybody for reasons. And what's interesting about that is in Superman Comics #1, where they're retelling his origin, he does not actually go to the city and become a superhero until his adopted parents pass away, which is really weird because we have Superboy comics of him being Superboy in Smallville, where he didn't even reveal his powers and wear his suit until, they passed away and he went to the city. Superman has been extremely retconned over the years. His origin story has been updated and retold in many different ways to sometimes fit the narrative of the day, but fit a specific narrative of what they want. I mean, I think all the DC characters have had their origins rewritten at some point. Now, a lot of these people appeared in the Golden Age, and the comic books that they have, the ideas that were being held when they first came out, are pretty antiquated by today's standards, and not just in cultural relevance, but in the way things were done in the 40s. We don't use the vehicles and political leanings today that we did in the 1940s, despite the way the culture is going. But Superman is a heavily retconned character. Now, I will give Siegel and Schuster credit. When they created Superman, they probably didn't think that they were going to be creating the gold standard for superheroes that was going to stand the test of time. What is this? 70 or 80? No, hold on. 85 years later. Yeah, we're 85 years. 15 more years will be the 100 of Superman. But they didn't think that they would be having the gold standard for superheroes that would last 85 years later. What I mean by the gold standard of superheroes, for those of you who are not familiar with that phrase, is superheroes are compared to Superman in any way. When you bring in a character with super strength, it's, can he beat Superman? Is he as strong as Superman? Is he as fast as Superman? Does he hold the ideals? Superman is pretty much a frame of reference of where you want your superhero to be. You start with Superman, and then you go from there. More powerful, less powerful, the ideals, how he wants to do things. I mean, even in my younger days, when I was coming up with a superhero of my own, Superman was one of the first things that came to mind. Why wouldn't he be? It's been around for 85 years. Now, I do like the fact that they did lay the groundwork for who Superman would be in the beginning, and I don't even think that they don't even say DC in the first one. I do believe they're national periodicals at first. I don't even think that they knew how popular Superman was going to be. Despite being on the cover of the first issue, the next couple of issues all the way up until #7, he doesn't have an appearance until #7, despite being the featured story for all of those issues. Now, when they finally do Superman Comics #1, I think that everything, all the groundwork is laid for him. Like, we established the Daily Planet, because in the beginning he was part of the Daily Star. But this gives you an idea of what they might have been thinking for the future of Superman. And when anybody talks about classic costume, they're not talking about this, but this is his classic costume and his classic look. So let's go ahead and cover the first appearance of Superman, where he originally appeared, because like I said, in the origin that most people go with is the origin that they established in Superman #1. the first appearance of the Kents. But this is where everything came from, so you can get the idea of what they might have been shooting for when they first came out, not knowing the popularity and impact that Superman would have in the future. I'm not going to go into that. There were many, many documentaries and stories crediting Superman over the years, so you don't need me to go into it. But I am going to cover his original origin page per page. So let's get into the original Superman origin. Now, before we get started with this, I did mention Superman #1. The Superman #1 actually reprints the first couple of Action Comic stories for their first issue, although the first two, I think it's 2 pages, they changed the origin, adding in the Kents and all that. But they do follow the first story, but they've added in some extra pages. In Action Comics #1, they show that Superman is leaping onto the governor's grounds, and he's got a woman tied up, but they didn't explain it. But in Superman #1, they actually do have a lead into that opening, and I don't believe that it was missing from Action Comics #1, because if you look at the artwork, the shading and the style is different for this lead into the first story. I mean, the costume is shaded differently, the S's look different, but after the lead in, everything from Action Comics #1 and then Action Comics #2 are the first 2 stories on Superman #1. What they do is, I found this page right here, which is a scientific explanation of Superman's amazing strength. The red sun giving Superman his strength would be something that would come much later in the comic books. I'm not exactly sure when that comes in. They show with a scene here that Superman coming from the planet of Krypton, they are millions of years more advanced than us and at physical perfection. Now, there's also a picture here where you see the size of the planets of Krypton and Earth. Now, with Earth being a smaller planet, the gravitational pull isn't as great. So, Superman's strength is coming from the fact that on his planet, people are at physical fitness, so that would be part of him too. And with the gravity being stronger on his planet and less on the Earth, it gives him feats that would be superhuman to us because it's less gravity. Okay, I'm breaking into my video just for a moment here. I did find this in Action Comics #262 in 1959. Superman does talk about how they were given the powers by the effects of the yellow sun. So right here you can see it, and let's get back to the video. So it'd be like an athlete perfecting himself wearing weighted clothing. When he finally gets that weight off, he can move faster, harder, better because he's not weighted down as much, which is the same thing here. Superman isn't weighted down by our gravity, so he's able to do things that are basically superhuman to us. Okay, with an understanding of that, let's go ahead and review the very first appearance. Now, we start off with this cover that is like super synonymous with Superman. I mean, when talking about Superman, this is the cover that most people, go with first. Even if they don't associate with the first issue very often, because most people go with what was established in Superman #1, which was made just a year later. Superman, Jerome Siegel and Joel Shuster. As a distant planet was destroyed by old age, the scientists placed an infant son within a hastily devised spaceship, launching it towards Earth. See, in the first episode, we don't even call it Krypton, our first issue. When a vehicle landed on Earth, a passing motorist discovered a sleeping babe within, turned the child over to an orphanage. We don't even establish the Kents in this issue, even though he is Clark Kent. They do call him Clark Kent in this issue. The Kent family isn't even established until Superman #1, which would be a year later. They notice that the kid has tremendous strength in the orphanage, and here's a description of his powers. When maturity was reached, he discovered he could easily leap 1/8 of a mile, hurdle a 1/8 of a mile, hurdle a 20-story building, raise tremendous weights, run faster than an express train, and nothing less than a bursting shell could penetrate his skin. Now it says nothing less than a bursting shell. Now I'm guessing that they're trying to establish that he is bulletproof, and they do show that, but they don't say what extent that he's bulletproof. Early Clark decided he must turn his titanic strength into channels that would benefit mankind, and so was created Superman. And this is where we see the very first costume. Now, as we've come to develop Superman lore, we know that his strength was granted to him by the yellow sun in our solar system, but it is actually a different explanation that they give in this comic, a scientific explanation of Clark Kent's amazing strength. Kent came from a planet whose inhabitants' physical structure was millions of years advanced of our own. Upon reaching maturity, the people of his race became gifted with titanic strength. The way they break up the word in the panel here. Okay. Now they show that evolutionary things like this have already existed on our planets, with ants being able to lift higher than their own strength and grasshoppers being able to leap gigantic distances. Yes, they're trying to show that an alien race more advanced than ours is comparable to insects. Anyways, we see Superman jumping. The animation of him jumping was weird. We see him jumping with a bound and gagged woman that he leaves on a front yard, and we realize that this is the governor's estate. He wants to see the governor, and I'm not sure if this is an attendant or a bodyguard, but he says, this is illegal entry. I'll have you arrested. Answer my question. Are you going to take me to the governor? So the guy won't take him to the governor, so Superman lifts him up and sees his own way. He finds that the governor is protected by a gigantic steel door, which I think is kind of ridiculous, because if you look at the rest of the room, it looks like it's regular sheetrock. So what is the benefit of a giant steel door if the rest of the walls are not reinforced? So he goes to the governor, says that he has a signed confession. And let's see, I'm guessing this is a bodyguard. He thinks that the governor is being menaced, so he doesn't hear the conversation. He shoots Superman and nothing happens. As he shoots Superman, Superman reaches for him and says, "This is no time for horseplay." And then we see the counting clock in the corner, knowing that the governor, time is of the essence, because only the governor of the state of where someone is being executed can have a stay of execution. So he gets on the phone. "Stop, the governor has pardoned her." And he exclaims that the woman that we saw him jumping great distances with is the actual murderer. So the governor pardons. He sees the paper, and then on the very next page, miles away, the governor's private chamber. "Gentlemen, I still cannot believe my senses. He's not human. Thank heavens he's apparently on the side of law and order." We see that Clark Kent does work for a newspaper that was established early on, but he works for the Daily Star. Okay, I'm going to break in here just again real quick. He did work for the Daily Star to begin with, but right here we see that in Action Comics number 23, they say that he works for the Daily Planet. So Action Comics number 23 is when it is established. Let's get back to the video. "You wanted to see me? Yes, be superseded. Have you ever heard of Superman?" "What?" "Reports have been streaming in of a fellow with gigantic strength named Superman actually exists. You guys have some weird run-on sentences. I'm making it your steady assignment to cover these reports. Think you can handle it? So early on, the chief, who was just editor at this point, wants him to be on the Superman beat. As he's leaving, he hears of a domestic violence situation, and he gets there really quickly and decides to intervene, and we see a guy who apparently is whooping his wife, because the wife is on the floor and he's got what appears to be a belt or a strap of some sort. Superman hurls him into the wall, and he comes back with the knife that breaks against his skin. And now you're going to get a lesson you'll never forget, and he faints. Yes, then Superman hears that the police are coming, so he decides to change back into the Clark Kent uniform. And when the police officer comes in, he says that he heard, I've arrived to find this place looking like this, as though our Superman friend has dropped by and paid a visit. So he just says he happened to walk by. This really established early on of superheroes being part of a newspaper or radio media. I mean, it just all established from Clark Kent. So he goes and asks Lois out on a date, and she agrees, but he realizes that she's not very interested in the date and avoids him at the office. And she doesn't want to say why, because, all the sob story she goes through all day. So as he's dancing, a guy decides that he wants to butt in on the action, and Clark Kent just kind of acts all subdued. Lois takes matters into her own hands and slaps the guy and exclaims, this is why she doesn't like him. You asked me earlier this evening why I avoid you. I'll tell you, it's because you're a spineless, unbearable coward. Now, the guy who she slapped does not like the fact that he has been rejected. So he gets in the car and chases off after the taxi, runs them off the road, and kidnaps Lois. As we see, Superman has changed into his costume, and he's standing on the road and they're about to crash into him when he leaps over the car and chases the car down. But step on the gas, he's chasing after us. It's the devil himself. So he grabs the car and he lifts it up into the air and he starts to shake it out. Now, the interesting thing is there's supposed to be 4 people in the car. And when he shakes it out, we see 2 people come out of the car and he catches Lois. And I guess he does that with one hand, because then he turns his attention back to the car and smashes it into the rock. Now, I find this kind of interesting because usually what you see on the cover of a comic doesn't represent what's going to happen in the comic. So the fact that the cover and this scene right here are pretty much synonymous with each other is actually rather unusual. So he takes off after Bush and he hangs him high on a telephone pole. And then he goes over to Lois. You needn't be afraid of me. I won't harm you. And she takes him, he takes her back home the next morning. But I tell you, I saw Superman last night. Are you sure it wasn't the pink elephant you saw? Lois is treating Clark colder than ever. And let's see. The editor wants Clark to go, let's see. I've even gotten headlines. There's some war going on in a small South American republic. Sam Monty, and to stir up the news, I'm sending you down there. So he's sending Clark overseas, but instead, Clark goes to Washington. Clark Kent goes to Washington. That'll make a good movie. Now, Clark Kent is sitting in the halls of Washington, and the reason he went here becomes more evident in the next issue. He sees what looks like a shifty-looking man talking to a senator and snaps a picture and asks who he is, so he gets identified and knows that they're going to be meeting at 8:30 that next morning, or that evening. So he eavesdrops on the conversation, and as this man leaves the senator's room, he confronts him and he says, he's not going to talk. I don't know what you're talking about. So Superman grabs him and takes him on a view of the city by way of the telephone lines. The power lines. The guy is afraid that they're going to be electrocuted, and Superman says, don't be silly. Birds sit up here all the time and they don't get electrocuted unless they touch the poles. And he leaps over the pole. Oops, almost touched it, that one. The guy is freaking out, and then they see the Capitol building. And Superman says, "Look, the Capitol. Let's pay a visit. What a magnificent view. Help, help." I wonder, and as they're standing on the Capitol building, I wonder if we could jump all the way to that building. No, don't. Desperate. He jumps and then he says he misses it. And a lot of this is resolved in the next issue. And so begins the startling adventures of the most sensational strip character of all time, Superman. A physical marvel, a mental wonder, Superman is destined to reshape the destiny of a world. Only in Action Comics you can thrill at the daring deeds of this superb creation. Don't miss an issue. And that's the first appearance. Okay, I hope you liked this story. I hope you like some of the origin stories. I'd like to do more origins